He looked so small standing there, clutching a piece of paper with shaking hands. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying for hours. He whispered, "Please hide this from my dad." I thought maybe he'd drawn something embarrassing or silly, but when I unfolded the paper, my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't a normal drawing. It showed my house, my exact house. Same windows, same porch, even my flower boxes. And inside, through the bedroom window, there was a woman drawn lying in bed, me. Standing beside her was a man, tall and faceless, holding something in his hand that looked like a knife. I remember staring at it, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then Jacob said something I'll never forget. He said it's going to happen soon. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a kid's imagination. It was a warning. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. You won't believe what happened that night. My name is Nora Bennett, and I'm an elementary school art teacher. I've worked with hundreds of kids over the years, and I can usually tell the difference between an active imagination and real fear. But the day Jacob handed me that drawing, something about him made my stomach twist. It was a Friday afternoon, and the classroom smelled like paint and glue. The kids were finishing their projects before the bell rang, laughing and talking like always. Jacob sat at the far table, quiet and focused, his pencil moving fast across the paper. He wasn't like the other kids. He hardly spoke, but his drawings always stood out, too dark for his age. He'd sketch people with angry faces, shadowy houses, always using black and gray while everyone else used color. That day, the final bell rang, and the room filled with the noise of backpacks zipping and sneakers squeaking. One by one, the kids ran out, until only Jacob was left. He stood by my desk, gripping that folded piece of paper. His eyes darted to the door, and his voice was barely a whisper when he said, "Please hide this from my dad." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean, hide it?" He shook his head, eyes filling with tears. "He doesn't like when I draw bad things. He gets really mad." I gently took the paper from his hand. It was crumpled and slightly damp, like he'd been holding it for a long time. "Jacob, it's okay. You're not in trouble," I said, trying to calm him down. He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Don't let him see." Then, before I could ask anything else, the door opened. A man stepped inside, the kind of presence that made the air in the room feel colder. He was tall, with broad shoulders, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt. His expression was stiff, polite, but there was something in his eyes that made me tense. "Hey, buddy," he said. "Ready to go?" Jacob's body went rigid. He mumbled, "Yes, Dad," and grabbed his backpack without. Looking up, the man's eyes flicked toward me. "Thanks for keeping an eye on him, Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone calm but his smile not reaching his eyes. I forced a polite nod, clutching the paper under my notebook. As they left, I noticed Jacob glance back once. He looked terrified. That look stuck in my mind all day. After school, I finally unfolded the drawing. My hands shook as I smoothed out the paper. There it was, my house, down to the smallest detail, even the cracked tile on my porch steps. I'd never shown my address to anyone at school, but somehow this kid knew what my bedroom looked like. My first thought was that it had to be a coincidence. Maybe he'd just drawn a random house that happened to look like mine. But the longer I stared, the harder it was to believe that. My house was drawn from an angle that only someone who'd been outside could know. When I got home that night, the drawing was all I could think about. I set it on my kitchen counter, trying to forget about it, but I kept glancing at it every time I walked by. Eventually, I called my sister Lisa and told her what happened. She laughed softly. "You're overthinking it, Nora. Kids make weird drawings all the time. He probably saw a house on your street and copied it." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. Before going to bed, I locked every door and double-checked every window. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, something about that drawing felt like a promise, something that was coming. And when I woke up around midnight to the sound of faint footsteps outside my window, I realized the nightmare might already be starting. That night, I barely slept. The sound outside my window came and went, soft, steady, deliberate. Every time I thought it was gone, I'd hear it again. A slow step, a scrape, a faint tap against the siding of my house. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out everything else. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or the wind, but I didn't really believe that. The next morning, when the sun finally came up, I checked outside. There were footprints in the soft dirt under my window. Big ones, adult-sized. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. I went to school like normal, clutching my coffee like it was the only thing keeping me steady. When I saw Jacob's empty seat in class, my stomach dropped. He hadn't missed a day before. I asked the office if his parents had called. The secretary said casually, "His dad called this morning, said Jacob's sick and won't be in for a few days." Something about her tone bothered me. I asked, "Did he sound normal?" She shrugged. I didn't think much of it, but I did, because now I couldn't stop thinking about the drawing and those footsteps. During lunch, I called my sister Lisa. "He didn't come to school today," I said. "I think something's wrong." Lisa sighed. "Nora, you can't assume the worst. Maybe he really is sick." "I know how it sounds," I said quietly, "but his dad gives me a bad feeling. And that drawing, Lisa, it showed my bedroom. My bedroom. How would a kid even know what my house looks like?" She didn't have an answer. I could hear her typing in the background. "Okay," she finally said. "Then go to the police if you're that worried. Show them the drawing." I did think about it, but what would I even say? An 8-year-old gave me a drawing of my house and said his dad's dangerous. They'd think I was paranoid. When classes ended that afternoon, I stayed late grading papers, just to keep busy. As the sun set outside the classroom windows, I noticed something odd. On my desk, next to the pencil jar, was a folded piece of paper. I hadn't seen it earlier. My first thought was that another student left a project behind. I opened it. It was another drawing. This one showed my classroom, me standing by the chalkboard, and a tall man standing outside the window behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I ran to the window and looked outside. The school parking lot was empty. The sky was dim and gray. I told myself I was being paranoid again, but the fear in my chest wouldn't go away. That night, I called Lisa again. "Someone's watching me," I said flatly. She sighed. "You're scaring yourself. Then how do you explain the footprints? Or the new drawing left in my class when the doors were locked all day?" Her voice softened. "Maybe talk to the principal tomorrow, or call Jacob's dad. Maybe he—" "No," I interrupted. "I don't want to talk to him. There's something wrong with that man." After hanging up, I sat on the couch staring at the front door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. I pulled out the original drawing again, tracing the outline of the man standing over my bed. My hands trembled. I hadn't noticed it before, but there was a number written in tiny letters in the bottom corner. 3. 3. Was it a countdown? A warning? A list? My mind started spinning with possibilities. That night, I tried to distract myself with a movie, but every noise made me jump. When the porch light flickered, I froze. Then came a soft knock on the door. 3 slow taps. I stood perfectly still. Another knock, louder this time. I turned off the TV and grabbed my phone, dialing Lisa's number. She picked up immediately. "Lisa," I whispered. "Someone's outside my house." "Did you call the police?" "I don't know if it's him. What if it's Jacob? What if he needs help?" The knocking stopped. Silence filled the air. "Don't open the door," Lisa said firmly. "I'm coming over." I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness. I waited, barely breathing. When Lisa arrived 15 minutes later, we searched the yard together with her flashlight. There was no one there, but near my window, just like before, were the same footprints. Fresh this time, pressed deep into the dirt. The next day at school, I couldn't focus. I kept watching the door, hoping Jacob would walk in, but his seat stayed empty. During recess, I decided to drive by his house. It wasn't far from the school, just a few streets away. When I pulled up, the blinds were drawn. The yard was unkempt, toys scattered across the grass. Then I saw movement, a small face peeking from behind the curtain. Jacob. He looked pale. his eyes wide. When he saw me, he mouthed something I couldn't hear, then quickly disappeared from view. A cold wave of dread ran through me. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. After a minute, I left, afraid of what might happen if his father saw me. That night, the fear was back stronger than ever. I double-checked every lock, closed every blind, and tried to sleep with the lights on. Sometime around midnight, I woke up to a sound that made my blood run cold. The soft creak of my back door opening. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again. A faint thud on the kitchen floor. Someone was inside. My mind raced. I remembered the drawing, the shadow standing over my bed. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, trying not to make noise. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. And just before I could dial for help, I saw it. Through the gap under my bedroom door. A shadow moving past in the hallway. It stopped right outside my room. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, my phone clutched so tightly my knuckles turned white. The shadow under the door was still there, unmoving, silent. My breath came in shallow bursts, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever was out there could hear it. I didn't dare move. I didn't even dare breathe too loudly. 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Was it a burglar? Was it Mr. Miller? Was it just my imagination? But deep down, I knew it wasn't imagination. The drawings weren't coincidences, and Jacob's terrified eyes weren't a lie. Someone was in my house. After what felt like forever, the shadow shifted. Slow, careful footsteps creaked across the hallway floor. I could hear them move toward the stairs. This was my chance. I unlocked my phone with trembling fingers and texted Lisa. "Someone is in the house. Call the police." I didn't wait for a reply. I slipped off the bed, trying not to make a sound, and reached for the baseball bat I kept under it. My legs shook as I crept toward the window, unsure if I should try to escape or stay put. Then I remembered the back door. I had heard it open earlier. That meant whoever it was had a way out, maybe even a way back in. The air in the room felt heavy. Every creak of the floorboard sounded deafening. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs and something else. A dragging sound, like fabric brushing against the floor. My body stiffened. I didn't want to go down there, but staying felt worse. I had to move. I opened my bedroom door as quietly as I could. The hallway was dimly lit by the light from the street lamp outside, spilling through the window. The air smelled faintly of cold night air and something metallic, like rust. I tiptoed toward the stairs, each step a battle between terror and instinct. Then my phone buzzed in my hand. Lisa had replied, "Police on the way. Get out now." The sound of that tiny buzz might as well have been an explosion. Downstairs I heard movement, fast, startled. A footstep, then another. I bolted back toward my room and shut the door, locking it. My chest burned from panic. Then came the sound I had been dreading, a doorknob turning, slow, testing. I held my breath and gripped the bat tighter. The knob rattled once, twice, and then silence. My body trembled so badly I could barely stand. I backed away toward the window, ready to break it if I had to. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper through the door. A man's voice, low and calm. "You shouldn't have taken it." My blood ran cold. He wasn't talking about money. He meant the drawing. I could barely think. My voice cracked as I said, "Who are you? What do you want?" He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that didn't sound human. "You already know." Every muscle in my body locked up. The man's voice was eerily familiar. I had heard it before. At school that afternoon when Mr. Miller thanked me for taking care of his boy. Before I could react, I heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Flashing red and blue lights spilled through the windows. The police had arrived. There were shouts outside, orders, commands, and the sound of heavy boots on the porch. I ran to the window and waved frantically. "Up here! He's inside!" One of the officers spotted me and yelled for backup. Within seconds, there was the crash of a door being forced open. I heard shouting, a scuffle, then silence. I stayed by the window, shaking, until a knock came at my bedroom door. "Ma'am, it's the police. You're safe now." When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. I could barely get the words out. "Where is he?" They exchanged a glance. "He's gone," one of them said. "We think he escaped through the back before we got here." My stomach dropped. "Gone?" "We found footprints leading into the woods behind your house," the officer said. "We're tracking him now. You need to come with us." They escorted me outside, where several police cars lined the street. The flashing lights painted everything red and blue, making it hard to tell what was real. Neighbors had gathered on their porches, whispering. Lisa came running up the driveway, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Are you okay?" she cried. I nodded weakly, unable to speak. My house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a stranger's home. Dark, unsafe, hollow. An officer approached holding a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small, crumpled piece of paper. "We found this near your back door," he said. "Recognize it?" I took one look and felt my knees buckle. It was another drawing. This time it showed my house again, but from inside. It showed police cars outside, and in one of the upstairs windows, a man drawn standing next to me. The officer's voice faded as I stared at the picture. My entire body went cold. The ink was fresh. The paper was still damp from the night air. That meant he had drawn it right before he came in. The realization hit me like a wave. He wasn't just watching me. He was planning something. Each drawing was a step ahead, a warning of what he would do next. As the officers searched the property, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching from somewhere close. Maybe the woods, maybe a car down the street. When they finally drove me to Lisa's house to stay the night, I stared out the window of the police car, the reflection of my pale face overlapping the dark trees outside. I knew this wasn't over, because whoever Mr. Miller really was, he wasn't just drawing scenes. He was writing them into reality, and I was still his unfinished picture. The police drove me to my sister Lisa's house that night, but even surrounded by officers, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every time we passed a streetlight, I half expected to see a face staring back at me from the shadows. When we arrived, Lisa held me tight, refusing to let go. She helped me inside, locked every door twice, and turned on every light. "You're safe now," she said softly, but her voice didn't sound convincing. I nodded, pretending to believe it. 2 officers stayed parked outside, watching the neighborhood until morning. I tried to sleep in Lisa's guest room, but every sound made my heart jump. The tick of the clock, the creak of the house, even the faint hum of the refrigerator, all of it felt amplified. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for the first sign of daylight. When morning came, I felt numb. The police returned to my house to investigate further. They found muddy footprints behind the garage and a piece of fabric caught on the fence. Dark blue, like the flannel shirt Mr. Miller had worn the day I met him. But he was still missing. They said they'd put out an alert, that he couldn't hide for long. Still, the thought of him being out there made my skin crawl. Later that afternoon, Detective Harris, the one assigned to my case, sat at Lisa's kitchen table with me, reviewing details. "You said Jacob drew the pictures before each event?" he asked, flipping through his notebook. "Yes," I said quietly. "He drew my house before it happened, then my classroom, then another picture the night of the break-in." He nodded slowly, tapping his pen. "Do you still have the drawings?" "I gave them to the officers last night." He frowned. "We didn't find any drawings at the station. Are you sure they were turned in?" My stomach dropped. "Yes, they bagged them for evidence." He looked toward the window, thinking, then someone misplaced them, or they never made it there. The realization hit me like a punch. If the drawings were missing, it meant only 2 possibilities. Either someone took them from the evidence room, or someone never intended for them to be found. That evening, I decided I couldn't sit in Lisa's house any longer. I needed answers. Against her protests, I told her I was going back to school the next morning to talk to the principal and see if they'd heard from Jacob or his father. "You can't go alone," she said, grabbing my arm. "If he's still out there, I'll be fine," I interrupted. "I just need to understand what's happening." The next morning, I parked in front of the school. It was quiet, the hallways still empty before classes started. The familiar smell of crayons and disinfectant should have felt comforting, but it didn't. It felt hollow. When I walked into my classroom, something immediately felt off. My desk drawer was slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. I pulled it open and froze. Inside was a single piece of folded paper. My throat tightened as I unfolded it. It was another drawing. This one showed a classroom, my classroom, with police cars outside the window and two stick figures drawn near the desk. One looked like me. The other, taller, stood behind me, holding something in his hand. Written at the bottom were two words in shaky handwriting. "It's tonight." I stumbled back, my pulse racing. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hall. A man's voice called out softly, "Ms. Bennett?" It was Detective Harris. Relief washed through me for a second. "In here," I said, my voice trembling. He stepped into the doorway, his badge hanging from his neck. "You okay?" I nodded, though my body was shaking. "He left another drawing," I said, holding it out. He took it, studying it closely. Then his expression darkened. "Stay here," he said firmly. "I'll call for backup." He stepped out into the hall, talking into his radio. I could hear the static of his voice, but then it cut off mid-sentence. Silence. "Detective?" I called, stepping closer to the door. No response. My stomach turned. I edged into the hallway. It was empty. The classroom lights flickered slightly, and I felt that same heaviness in the air again, the kind that tells you something bad is about to happen. At the end of the hallway, near the exit, someone was standing with their back turned, the shape of their shoulders, the flannel shirt, the stillness. It was him, Mr. Miller. I froze. He turned slowly, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly in the daylight. His eyes were hollow, lifeless, but his mouth twisted into a smile that didn't belong on a human face. "You shouldn't have taken it," he said again, his voice low and calm. "You shouldn't have interfered." My hands shook as I stepped back. "Where's Jacob?" I managed to ask. He smiled wider. "Safe now. He doesn't draw anymore." Before I could respond, a shout came from behind me. Two officers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Hands up!" one yelled. Mr. Miller didn't move at first. He just stared at me, that same empty smile. Then he reached into his pocket and threw something to the ground, another folded piece of paper. The officers tackled him as I screamed. They cuffed him, reading his rights, but my eyes were locked on that paper lying a few feet away. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was another drawing. It showed a classroom, again mine. But this time, the window was broken, and the figure meant to be me was gone. The man in the picture stood alone in the room, holding a pencil. The detective took it from me gently. "We've got him," he said. "It's over." But as they dragged Mr. Miller away, he turned to me and said something that made my blood run cold. "You can't erase it, Miss Bennett. Once it's drawn, it has to happen." For a moment, I thought he was just trying to scare me. But later, when I went back to lock up the classroom, I saw something that froze me in place. On my desk was a single sheet of white paper, blank, but still damp, as if ink had just been washed away, and written faintly in the corner was one word: next. The following weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. The nightmare was supposed to be over. Mr. Miller was behind bars, and the news said he had confessed to breaking into multiple homes and stalking several women. But knowing that didn't make me feel safe. I kept replaying his words in my mind. Once it's drawn, it has to happen. It wasn't just a threat. It felt like a curse that lingered in every quiet moment, every creak of the floor, every time I saw a child draw with a pencil. I moved back into my house after 2 weeks of staying with Lisa. The police had repaired the door, replaced the locks, and installed a new alarm system. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I checked every corner before sleeping, kept a light on in the hallway, and jumped at every sound. The first night back, I barely slept an hour. The silence felt too heavy, as if the house itself remembered what had happened. Jacob and his mother had been relocated by child services. The detective told me they were safe in another state under new identities. It should have been comforting, but it only made me feel emptier. That little boy had carried the weight of his father's darkness, and even now, I could still see the fear in his eyes the day he handed me that drawing. I wondered if he ever forgave me for not understanding sooner. A week after returning home, I went through the box of personal belongings the police had returned from evidence. Among the papers was a sealed envelope I didn't recognize. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of drawing paper, the same kind Jacob had used. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It wasn't a picture of my house this time. It was a sketch of a quiet street, a small house with a picket fence, and a woman sitting at a table inside. Me. But across the street, behind a tree, was the outline of another figure. It wasn't detailed like before, but I knew what it meant. Someone was still watching. I called Detective Harris immediately. He came over that night, examined the drawing carefully, and frowned. "You're sure this wasn't left here earlier?" he asked. "I've gone through this box 3 times, I said. "It wasn't here before." He nodded slowly. "It could be from before the arrest. He might have drawn several of them in advance." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe it was just an old piece of evidence that got mixed up. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. After he left, I locked every door again and sat in the living room with all the lights on. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. It was a single image, a photo of one of Jacob's old drawings taped to my classroom wall. Except my classroom had been closed for repairs. The timestamp on the photo was from 10 minutes ago. I called the police again. They searched the school but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no drawings. "It might have been a prank," the officer said, trying to sound reassuring. But there was no way a stranger could have accessed those old sketches. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. My car alarm went off in the middle of the night, but no one was there. A light in my kitchen flickered every night at the same time. Once, I found a piece of paper on my doorstep with faint pencil marks, too smudged to see clearly, but the outline looked like 2 windows and a shape in between them. Lisa begged me to move out, to start fresh, somewhere new. I thought about it, but something in me couldn't leave. I didn't want to live in fear anymore. I wanted to reclaim my life, my classroom, and my peace. The next Monday, I went back to school. The principal had been kind enough to give me time off, but I knew hiding would only make things worse. When I stepped into my classroom, the smell of paper and paint instantly brought back memories of Jacob sitting at his desk, quietly drawing. I stood there for a while, letting the silence settle. Everything was just as I left it, except for one small detail. On the far corner of the chalkboard, in faint chalk writing, someone had drawn a simple outline of a house, my house, and next to it, written in tiny letters, were the words, "You're safe now." I didn't know if it was Jacob's handwriting or if someone else had written it, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something lift from my chest. Maybe it was his way of saying goodbye. Maybe it was his way of letting me know that the nightmare was finally over. That night, I slept with my window open for the first time since everything happened. The breeze carried the faint sound of crickets, and for once, it didn't scare me. I woke up before sunrise, looked outside, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't the same woman who ignored her instincts, who brushed off a child's cry for help. I had learned that sometimes the warnings we're given aren't random, they're survival. The next morning, I framed the first drawing Jacob gave me and placed it in my classroom, not as a reminder of fear, but as a promise to always listen, to the quiet kids, to the strange details, to the signs we often overlook, because sometimes what saves us isn't courage or luck. It's simply believing that the danger is real, even when no one else does. Before leaving for work, I glanced at the framed picture one more time. The house, the window, the woman sleeping, it all looked different now. The figure that once stood over her was gone, erased. I smiled, whispered a quiet thank you to Jacob, and finally walked out the door, feeling free. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive.